I'm Sarah, 34 years old, average height about 5 feet 5 inches, with a figure that's somewhere between curvy and soft. I guess I've always been that way, even when I tried to push myself into something different. My hair is shoulder-length dark brown and has this annoying wave that refuses to behave, no matter what I do with it. I wear glasses most of the time. Contacts make my eyes burn, but I don't mind them. I guess you could say I'm one of those people who blends in. I don't turn heads, and I've made peace with that. I tell you all this because I want you to picture me as I stood there that night in sweatpants and a faded hoodie, hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. No makeup, just me and him. His name's Max, my dog, a German Shepherd mix with the biggest brown eyes you've ever seen. He's 8 now, getting older but still carries himself like a puppy. When he's excited, we've been through everything together, breakups, moves, those moments when the world feels too big and you feel too small. Max is my constant, my rock. At least, that's what I always thought. Until last night. You ever have a moment when the world shifts? Like something happens that cracks everything you believed in half and you're left standing in the rubble wondering what the hell just happened. That's where I was standing in the dark in the woods behind my house, staring at Max like I didn't even know him anymore. The woods were quiet, but not in a peaceful way. It was the kind of quiet that makes your skin prickle like the world's holding its breath. The moonlight barely made it through the trees, and my flashlight was starting to flicker. My fingers tightened around it, and I told myself it was just the batteries. But deep down, I knew that wasn't why my hands were shaking. Max was standing a few feet ahead of me, his ears perked, body tense. He wasn't barking, but something about the way he was staring into the trees made my stomach twist. It wasn't the playful curiosity I'd seen 100 times before. This is different. He looked like he was waiting, watching Max. I called, my voice break just a little. "Come here, boy." He didn't move, didn't even flick his ears like he normally would. He just stood there, frozen, like a statue carved out of shadow and fur. My chest tightened. "Max," I called again, louder this time. Still nothing. That's when I saw it, his tail. It wasn't wagging. Max always wagged his tail when I talked to him, even if he was distracted, but no. It was still rigid. I took a step closer, the leaves crunching on under my boots, and he let out a low growl, not at me. God, not at me, but at whatever he was staring at. My breath hitched. I couldn't see anything but Max. Could he always saw things before I did? Come on, Max. I whispered, my voice trembling. "Let up, go back inside. It's cold out here." He didn't budge. That's when the thought hit me. A stupid, irrational thought that I couldn't shake. What if he doesn't come back with me? Sounds ridiculous. I know he's my dog, my best friend. Why wouldn't he come back? But in that moment, standing there in the dark, I felt this sinking dread, like I was losing him. Like something was pulling him away and there was nothing I could do to stop it. I knelt down, my knees digging into the cold, damp earth. "Max," I said softly, my voice breaking, "please." Finally, he turned to look at me, and that's when I knew something was wrong. His eyes, they weren't the same. They were sharper, wilder. It was still Max, but it wasn't. I can't explain it, but it felt like I was looking at a part of him I'd never seen before. A part one didn't understand. My heart pounded as I held out my hand. "Come here, boy," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. He hesitated just for a second, and then he took a step toward me. Relief flooded through me, but it didn't last long because just as he reached me, I heard it, a sound, soft but unmistakable, a rustling in the bushes behind me. Max's head snapped up, and his growl deepened, his body coiling like a spring. My mouth went dry. I wanted to turn around to see what was there, but I couldn't. I was frozen, my heart hammering in my chest. And then Max did something I'd never seen him do before, something that made my blood run cold. He stepped in front of me. Max was always protective, sure, but this was different. This wasn't the playful bark he gave the mailman, or the way he'd nudge me away from a muddy puddle on our walks. This was primal, instinctive. I realized then that whatever was out there, it wasn't just scaring me. It was scaring him too. I didn't want to turn around, my whole body screamed at me not to. But the sound came again louder this time. Like something moving closer, my throat tightened, and I clutched the flashlight harder, my knuckles white. Max didn't move from his spot in front of me. His growl so low it was almost a vibration in the air. "Stay with me, Max," I whispered, though I wasn't sure if I was saying it for him or for myself. I took a shaky breath and forced myself to glance back. The beam of my flashlight trembled, cutting through the darkness, but there was nothing, just trees, branches swaying slightly in the breeze. No movement, no glowing eyes, nothing to explain why my heart was pounding like a drum in my chest. But Max wasn't buying it. He didn't relax, didn't stop growling. His muscles were taut, his eyes locked on a point deeper into the woods. I followed his gaze, but all I could see was shadow. "Okay," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Let him go back. Max, come on, we're going inside." I tugged lightly at his collar, but he didn't budge, his ears pinned back slightly, and for a second I thought he might actually bark, but then he turned his head to look at me. Just a quick glance, but it was enough to make me freeze. It wasn't fear I saw in his eyes. It was something else, something I couldn't name. I swallowed hard, my pulse racing. "Max, please," I begged, "don't do this." And then before I could stop him, he bolted, happened so fast. 1 second he was standing right in front of me, and the next he was a blur of fur and muscle tearing through the trees like he was chasing something. Max. I screamed, my voice echoing into the night. I stumbled after him, my feet catching on roots and rocks, the flashlight swinging wildly in my hand. My chest burned with every breath, but I didn't stop. I couldn't. Max, come back. I kept running, the beam of light bouncing off the trees, but he was too fast, too far ahead. I could hear him crashing through the underbrush, the sound growing fainter with every step. "Please," I gasped, tears stinging my eyes. "Please don't leave me." And then just like that, the noise stopped. I skidded to a halt, my breath coming in sharp, ragged gasps. The woods were silent again, but this time it wasn't just unsettling. It was suffocating. "Max." I called, my voice trembling, no answer. I swung the flashlight in every direction, my heart hammering against my ribs. "Max," I shouted louder this time. Still nothing. My legs felt like jelly. As I took a hesitant step forward, the light flickering again. I could feel the tears spilling down my cheeks, now hot and salty, but I didn't care. All I cared about was finding him. "Max, please." I whispered, my voice breaking, and then I heard it, a bark. Faint, distant, but unmistakable. "Max." I ran toward the sound, the flashlight bouncing wildly in my grip. The trees blurred together and the ground seemed to tilt beneath my feet, but I didn't stop. I couldn't. The barking came again, closer this time, and my heart leapt. "I'm coming," I shouted, tripping over a root, but catching myself before I fell. When I broke through the trees into a small clearing, I saw him. Max was standing there, his back to me, his body rigid. He wasn't barking anymore, just staring at something in the distance. I followed his gaze and my stomach dropped. There was nothing there, nothing I could see anyway. Just the empty clearing bathed in pale moonlight. "Max," I said softly, stepping closer. "What is it? What do you see?" He didn't move, didn't even acknowledge me. His entire focus was on whatever was in front of him, his body still as stone. My legs trembled as I stepped up beside him, my heart pounding so hard it hurt. "Max." "It's okay," I whispered, though I wasn't sure I believed it myself, and then just as I reached out to touch him, he let out a single sharp bark. I flinched, nearly dropping the flashlight. "Max, stop it!" I snapped, my voice shaking, but he didn't stop. He took a step forward, then another, his movements slow and deliberate, like he was stalking something. "Max." "No," I said. Panic rising in my chest. "Come back here." He paused, his ears flicking back slightly, but he didn't turn around. And then he did something that made my blood run cold. He looked at me over his shoulder, and for the briefest moment, I saw it again. That wildness in his eyes, and then he was gone, disappearing into the trees like a shadow. I stood there, frozen, the flashlight hanging limp in my hand. I wanted to run after him, to scream his name until my voice gave out. But my legs wouldn't move, as deep down I knew whatever Max was chasing, it wasn't something I could save him from. The forest was swallowing me whole, I could feel it. The trees loomed taller with every step I took, the air colder, thicker, my legs ached. But I kept moving, stumbling over roots and rocks, clutching the flashlight like it was the only thing tethering me to the world. I knew my throat burned from calling his name, but Max was gone every few seconds. I'd stop and listen, straining for the sound of his paws on the leaves, his bark, anything but all I heard was the wind whistling through the branches, mocking me. "Max." I shouted again, my voice cracking. It was useless, and I knew it. But I couldn't stop. What if he was hurt? What if he was scared? God, what if he was lost out here forever? Tears blurred my vision, and I wiped them away angrily. "This isn't happening," I whispered to myself. "This isn't happening. He's going to come back. He always comes back." But this time felt different. I could feel it deep in my gut, that gwing dread, that something had changed. I don't know how long I wandered, minutes, hours. Time felt meaningless in the darkness. The flashlight flickered again, and I smacked it against my palm, cursing under my breath. And then I saw it, a shadow quick, darting between the trees ahead. My breath caught, and I froze, my pulse roaring in my ears. "Max," I whispered, my voice trembling. The shadow moved again, and I took a step forward, gripping the flashlight tighter. "Max, is that you?" No answer. I forced myself to keep going, my heart hammering with every step. The trees thinned slightly, and I found myself in another small clearing. This one felt wrong. The air was heavier here, colder. I could feel it pressing down on me, making it hard to breathe, and then I saw him. Max was standing at the edge of the clearing, his back to me. Just like before, his head was low, his tail still, his whole body tense. Max's relief flooded through me, and I stumbled toward him, my knees almost giving out. "Oh my God, Max," I thought. He growled. It wasn't like the growls he'd made before, those low warning sounds. This one was deeper, harsher. It didn't sound like him at all. I stopped dead in my tracks. "Max," I said softly, my voice shaking. "It's me. It's okay. Letun, go home, okay?" He didn't move, didn't even look at me this time. His eyes were locked on something just beyond the clearing, something I couldn't see. I followed his gaze, and my stomach turned. There was nothing there, nothing but trees and shadows. "Max, please," I begged, tears streaming down my face. "Now come back to me for a moment." I thought he might. His ears twitched, and his growl quieted just for a second. But then he stiffened again, his focus snapping back to whatever invisible thing had him so transfixed. And that's when it hit me. I wasn't going to get him back. It wasn't a logical thought, it didn't even make sense. But standing there in that clearing with the air so heavy and cold, it felt like it was suffocating me. I knew this wasn't just about Max. This wasn't about me losing my dog. This was something bigger. Something I couldn't understand. No matter how hard I tried, "Max," I whispered, my voice breaking, "please don't do this." He took a step forward, then another. "Max," I screamed, but he didn't stop. I wanted to run after him, to grab his collar and drag him back home, but my feet wouldn't move. I was rooted to the spot, paralyzed by the weight of what I was feeling. And then he was gone. I stood there staring at the empty space where he'd been. The flashlight slipping from my hand, it hit the ground with a dull thud, the beam casting long, jagged shadows across the clearing. I wanted to scream, to cry, to run after him, but I couldn't. My legs gave out and I sank to the ground, my chest heaving with silent sobs. I don't know how long I sat there, long enough for the cold to seep into my bones, for the flashlight to die, completely plunging me into darkness. And in that darkness I realized something Max hadn't just left me. He'd chosen to go. I don't know what he saw, what pulled him away, but it was stronger than anything I could offer him, stronger than our bond, stronger than me. It broke me. When I finally stood up, my legs trembling beneath me, I knew I had to leave. Staying there wouldn't bring him back. Whatever had happened, whatever had taken him, it was beyond me. I turned and started walking the path back to the house, feeling longer and colder than I remembered. I don't think I'll ever see Max again. Not the Max I knew anyway. And the worst part, a small part of me wonders if he was never really mine to begin with. I didn't think I'd ever feel this kind of silence. Not the peaceful kind, the suffocating kind, the kind that presses on your chest and makes every breath feel like a struggle. I was sitting on the porch steps staring at the leash in my hand, felt heavier than it should, like the weight of it was pulling me down. Max's color dangled from the end, the faint clink of metal, the only sound in the stillness. He was gone. It wasn't sudden. I wish it had been. Then maybe I could have blamed something outside myself, but it wasn't like that. It was slow, quiet, like a thread unraveling until there was nothing left to hold on to. I'd seen it coming, the little changes, the moments when he wasn't quite himself. He'd sit at the window for hours, staring at nothing, his ears twitching at sounds I couldn't hear. He stopped wagging his tail when I came home. Stopped sleeping at the foot of my bed. At first I told myself it was nothing, dogs get older, they'd change. But deep down I knew it was more than that. The night he disappeared, I wasn't even surprised I'd left the back door open just for a moment, long enough to grab a drink to check my phone when I came back. He was gone. His bed was empty, the yard silent. I'd searched for hours, calling his name until my throat was raw. I drove through every street in the neighborhood, walked every trail in the woods behind the house, but he wasn't there by the time the sun came up. I knew he wasn't coming back. Now, sitting on the porch, I couldn't stop replaying it in my head, the way he looked at me that morning just before I opened the door, like he was trying to tell me something. I didn't understand it then, and I wasn't sure I ever would. The leash slipped from my hand, falling to the ground with a soft thud. I stared at it for a long time, my chest tightening. What kind of person loses their dog like this? What kind of person lets them go without even realizing it? I closed my eyes, the memories rushing in like a flood, the way Max used to race through the yard, his tail wagging so hard it looked like it might fall off, the way he'd press his nose into my palm, his eyes full of trust. The nights we'd spent curled up on the couch, his warmth, the comfort. I hadn't realized I'd need it. He'd been more than a dog to me. He'd been my family, my constant in a world that felt too chaotic most days, and now he was gone. I opened my eyes, the tears falling freely now. I didn't wipe them away. There was no point. The silence was louder than ever, but it wasn't empty. It was full of all the things I couldn't say, the things I couldn't fix. Maybe Max had known something I didn't. Maybe he'd felt the pull of something bigger, something I couldn't see or understand, or maybe he just needed to go. The thought hit me like a punch to the gut, and I let out a shaky breath. I'd always thought I was the one who saved him, that I was the one who gave him a home, a life. But now I wasn't so sure. Maybe he'd saved me, and maybe in the end, letting him go was the last thing he could do for me. I stood up my legs, trembling beneath me. The leash lay forgotten on the porch as I turned and walked back inside. The house felt too big, too quiet, but I didn't stop. I went to the window, the one Max used to sit by, and looked out into the yard. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the grass. For a moment, I thought I saw him there, his silhouette framed by the fading light. But when I blinked, he was gone. I didn't cry this time. Instead, I whispered thank you. And for the first time, the silence didn't feel so heavy. If you're enjoying my story, hit the like button.